Right, awesome. Okay, so where we're going to pick up is where we left off last week. And we're starting on the forward to the second edition. And we're starting at the very, very bottom of the page, page XV. So forward to the second edition, page XV. And it's kind of funny because I was a friend of mine was talking about the big book study and where we're picking up. And he's like, man, the forward to the second edition, that forward is fire. And I want you to know that's my experience. Also, if you're new and you're like, I'm sorry, a forward is fire. You're excited about a forward. I mean, what? That's fair. That was me when I got here too. But man, this forward is fire. It's exciting and it brings together the history and really the information that I need in order to achieve recovery in 12 steps. And I love that he said that it is fire, because where we're picking up is on the bottom paragraph where it says the spark that was to flare. See, we're not lying when we say this thing is fire. So the spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935. So what we're talking about is the first meeting that allowed, welcome, for those that just joined, we're on page XV, we're at bottom paragraph forward to the second edition. And what we're talking about is the meeting between our friend Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson, and that first successful 12-step call. And from there came the worldwide fellowship known as Alcoholics Anonymous. So in June 1935, during a talk between a New York stockbroker, and if you're writing in your book and you don't have the who's who and the what's what, the New York stockbroker is Bill Wilson, and an Akron physician. That is Dr. Bob. So what I want to emphasize is that this whole thing started with a successful 12-step call. One alcoholic carrying this message to another. And from that, man, that fire took off. All right. And I'm gonna read, I'm gonna explain, we're gonna make some notes, and then we're gonna go deep dive into the history. And it's exciting. Yeah, and if you can find Rob on your screen, behind Rob, there's Bill, there's Dr. Bob. So if you're wanting some visuals, I'm gonna put some other visuals up on the screen here in a little bit. But if you want the who's who, seeing who's who, who's what, go look at Rob. All right. Rob's who's who and what's what. Yeah, just giving you compliments. Thank you for all your help. All right, so it says 6 months earlier. And what I want to point out is 6 months. Bill Wilson is 12-stepping, carrying this message 6 months. And he's been 12-stepping for a lot longer than 6 months. But 6 months. I just want to emphasize, it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to be in a place where I am recovered. Recovered does not mean cured. And to be in a place where I can carry this message and help others. 6 months. And he was practicing for a long time before that. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession. Now, when we talk about the drink obsession, what we're talking about there is the mental obsession. And if you're writing in your book, you can make a little note, that mental obsession. What we're talking about is the insane thought that I have when I'm as sober as I am today, and my alcoholism is untreated. That thought that tells me this time will be different. That thought that tells me nobody will know. That thought that tells me I can go out for 3 days. That thought that tells me, you know what, my problem was drinking in Calgary, but we're hanging out with people in Medicine Hat. It'll be different this time. For those that know Alberta geography, no, I didn't go that far. That insane thought that I have when I'm sober, that tells me I can drink again. So he was relieved of that. And see, that is what I need, because my real problem is that I cannot stop myself from taking that first drink. So I need to be relieved of that insane thought that I believe that tells me I can, by a sudden. Now, don't stress out too much about sudden, but I will emphasize, doesn't take long to get well. Some of us have it a little more suddenly than others, but it does not take long to get well. And by a sudden spiritual experience. And it's real unfortunate that it's on two sides of the page. But if you're writing in your book today and you want to make a note, that is our solution. In 12-step, our solution is a spiritual experience. And if I'm going a little fast, don't worry. We're going to tie this all together here in a little bit. We're going to do a deep dive in history, and goodness, as we keep going, we're going to go through a lot of review. So again, my solution is a spiritual experience. And it says, following a meeting he had with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. So if you're writing in your book, that friend is Ebby Thatcher. I was just seeing who is Rob going to have behind his screen. So it's going to be, oh yeah, Rob, I love that. That is that's a phenomenal fun fact. So if you're like, Paige, I don't know if I'm here for the history, but I'm here for the fun facts. Rob's got you covered. So page XVI is the only page coming in the first 164 preface, doctor's opinion, that mentions the Oxford group specifically. We're going to talk about that Oxford group here in a little bit. But for those big book nerds, it's exciting. Ooh, a fun fact that you can just whip out at your home group, and everyone will want to be friends with you after that. All right, so the alcoholic friend was a gentleman by the name of Ebby Thatcher, E-B-B-Y, Thatcher, T-H-A-T-C-H-E-R. I'll put up on the screen in a bit. And it says he had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth. Now that Dr. William D. Silkworth is, you can look behind Rob and you can see a picture of this guy. And he is the gentleman who wrote the 2 letters of the doctor's opinion. And basically what he gave us was the diagnostic criteria of what is alcoholism, what is this illness that we suffer from. A New York specialist in alcoholism. And in his career, he's not an alcoholic. He's just a doctor who, I think a former neurologist who had to, work with drunks. He didn't have to. He did have a passion for it, but there might have been some economic stuff that pushed him towards it. Who worked with something in his career like 50,000 different alcoholics and different drug addicts. And that's why we care about what this guy has to say about alcoholism, because he's got experience with people like me. So a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now counted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. And you can make a little note when it says grave nature of alcoholism, that is our problem. And we're going to really expand on what that problem is. By the way, the word grave meaning fatal, the fatal nature of alcoholism, that is our problem. And if you want to expand on it now, what we're talking about there is we're talking about a physical allergy. That once I start to drink, or whatever brings you to this study, once I start to drink or once I start to use, there's something inside of me that kicks off and it says more. And the more that I drink or use or whatever brings you to this study, the more that I need, and I cannot control the amount that I take. That is the physical allergy. And that mental obsession, that's the second part of my problem. And that's when I'm as sober as I am today. And I think, man, I can do it again. And here's how. Now, we're in step 1. We're going to really focus on the physical allergy and the mental obsession. But as we go on later into the doctor's opinion and far more in step 2 and step 3, we're going to see that there's something beneath the mental obsession. We're going to see there's something beneath the physical allergy. What's known as a spiritual malady, a separateness from a power greater than myself, a pain that I experience. We're going to have a look at all of that, and we'll go into more detail. But that's what Bill Wilson learned. He learned that he has a mind that takes him back to the first drink and a body that compels him to continue to drink once he starts. That is our problem. And then it says, though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need for moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God. And so what are we talking about there? Well, I don't know about you. Moral inventory, that sounds like a step 4 to me, right? Confession of personality defects sounds like a 5th step. Restitution to those harms Sounds like a 8 and 9, going out, making some amends. Helpfulness to others, that sounds like step 12 to me. And the necessity of belief in and dependence upon God, that sounds like all the rest, doesn't it? So that we can make a little note, the 12 steps, that is our program of action. So what we're trying to see is we've got a problem, the grave nature of alcoholism, a solution, which is a spiritual awakening, and a way to get there. And that is the 12 steps. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into how this all came about. And I'm going to screen share something. All right. So let me know if that's legible and y'all can see that. Maybe a thumbs up. Awesome. Perfect. And so where our story begins for the history is on page 26. And if you want to jump there. I'm going to paraphrase. On page 26, it talks about a certain American businessman. That is this handsome gentleman, is a handsome fella, this handsome gentleman by the name of Rowland Hazard. And he came from money. He was this incredibly wealthy guy, but he suffered from alcoholism. And so he didn't have the ability to control the amount that he drank, and he knew, he's like, man, I gotta stay sober. I can't drink anymore. And so what he did was he went and he saw the best of the best of the best in the United States. He saw absolutely the best psychologists, the best psychiatrists. He went to the best equivalent of what treatment centers would be. You know, he went to the, Passages Malibu of the 1920s. You know, he went and he tried everything, but nothing worked. He couldn't stay sober and he couldn't control his drinking. And then he makes a decision. He's like, that's it. I'm going to go see the very best psychiatrist in the world. I'm going to see Sigmund Freud. And thankfully for us, Sigmund Freud was not accepting new patients. He's like, dude, I'm busy. I'm Sigmund Freud. I don't got time for you. By the way, I'm paraphrasing the history. It probably didn't happen verbatim like this. But he goes and he sees Sigmund Freud. Or he wants to go see Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud, he's not accepting any new patients. So he's got to slum it, right? Oh, he's got to just somehow scrape and manage to get by seeing probably the second most famous psychiatrist in history, Carl Jung. And again, I love making it's not a joke, but there's always humor in it. Doesn't a spiritual awakening always begin with us not getting what we want? And so Rowland Hazard works one-on-one with Carl Jung. He goes all the way to Switzerland and works one-on-one with Carl Jung for a year. They're doing intensive work, intensive psychoanalysis, intensive therapy. And Rowland Hazard, he's like, you know what? Every other time I got out of rehab, every other time I got out of treatment, every other time, I relapsed, but something feels different about this. Oh, awesome. Yeah, you can see pictures of these guys in the chat if you're interested. Something feels different. Anyone here ever get out of treatment and think, this time I feel different this time feels different? That was him. And then he leaves. He's feeling good. He's feeling confident. He's got an understanding of his mind, and it's working in its hidden springs. And he has to travel back to the United States. And as one does, he's a rich man. He stops off in France because he's got rich French friends. And they have a toast to his health, to his sobriety. He takes just a glass of wine. What could go wrong? And we know what happens. Off he goes on a bender. And a while later, he's got to go back to Carl Jung. And he shows up and he's like, dude, he probably didn't say dude, but this is how I like to tell the story. Dude, what the heck? Like, I thought I was cured. Do you know how much money I'm spending? I'm a wealthy guy, but like, dude. And Carl Jung says, I'm sorry. I misdiagnosed you. You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic, and people like you do not recover. And in that moment, Rowland Hazard experienced the hopelessness of our illness. And he experienced the hopelessness of step one. And out of a place of desperation, he's like, dude, he definitely said dude a lot. Just imagine Rowland Hazard as a surfer guy, right? Dude, Is there not any exception? And Carl Jung says, you know what? There are. Exceptions to cases as like yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. And in that moment, Roland Hazard learns what our solution is. Vital, because the grave nature of alcoholism, the fatal nature of alcoholism, vital, the life-giving nature of a spiritual awakening. That's what he was told. And Roland Hazard says, awesome, dude. I go to church. I got this thing. No problem. And Carl Jung said, hold on there. Hold the phone. It's really good that you go to church, because I mean, that means you'll probably be open to a spiritual awakening. But the odds of this thing happening to you are like the odds of getting struck by lightning. You know, it's like the odds of having a 1 in a million, like winning the lotto. You can't hang out in a church pew and hope this happens for you. You've got to go out and find it. And you see, Roland Hazard, in not getting what he wanted, Alcoholics Anonymous got our first break. You see, if he had gotten what he wanted, he would have seen Sigmund Freud, and Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, they studied together, and in their early days, they agreed with each other about a lot of things, and then they had a little bit of a split and a disagreement about stuff. But for our purposes, the main place in which they diverted was that Sigmund Freud believed all problems of the mind could be solved in and of the mind. But Carl Jung had a belief that there were certain conditions that required spiritual help. Thank God, thank goodness, right? Roland Hazard did not get what he wanted, and as a result got what he needed, and he had knowledge of a spiritual awakening, and he knew he couldn't just hang around and find it. And so what was growing in popularity at that time was an organization, a group known as the Oxford Group, the Oxford Movement. And the Oxford Group, they had absolutely nothing to do with alcoholism, nothing to do with addiction. They happened to be a religious group. 12-step isn't religious. And when in the reading, when it says, though Bill could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford Group, what he's talking about there is organized religion. He wasn't into the organized religion for our purposes and understanding of what the message we're trying to get here. And so the Oxford Group, they had nothing to do with addiction or alcoholism, but they had everything to do with having a deeper experience of the God of their understanding. That was their whole purpose. And Roland Hazard, he's like, oh, a deeper experience with the God of my understanding? You know, happened to be a religious God, but he's like, oh, I need one of those, or I'm gonna drink again. And so what the Oxford Group had was a series of actions that any human being could take to deepen their experience of God. And those series of actions became known and became developed and adapted into our 12 steps. So Roland Hazard, he now knows what our solution is, and he knows how to access the solution. What became our 12 steps, that program of action that he got from the Oxford Group. And you know, here's kind of the thing, Roland Hazard, he worked the steps, but he didn't have the best motives. He was kind of hoping he could give his mom a few happy memories before he inevitably died of alcoholism. And yeah, there's a fun fact if you guys want a fun fact in the chat, there's a fun fact. It's maybe not that, it's a fact. Find out if it's fun. Ooh, read it in the chat. So he's got the solution and the program of action. He's got the two pieces of information. Now he's not doing the steps for the best motives. He doesn't think he's going to die sober. He's only doing this so he can hopefully give his mom a few happy memories before he inevitably dies of alcoholism. But you know, the thing is, the steps, in my opinion, they don't care why I take them. If I take those actions, I will begin to get well. And he takes those actions and he has an experience and he's staying sober. And then he goes and he's a rich guy. He's going to have his summer in Vermont. He's gonna, go on a vacation, and he goes home to Vermont, and this other handsome fella, I always like describing them as handsome fellas. This handsome fella, Ebby Thatcher, an old friend of his. What he had done two things. I can't ever remember which one he was on trial for, but let me know if these sound like things we do. The one is he was drinking and driving, and he happened to run into an old lady's farmhouse. It's rural Vermont in the 1930s. There's nothing to hit, but he hit it. And as he runs into her old lady's farmhouse, he rolls down the window and asks for a cup of coffee. Classic, right? It's just classic. And then the other thing that he did, when you get a couple beers in you, and you get a little like projecty, and you get a little ambitious-y, I got a couple beers in, I can conquer the world. So he gets a couple beers in, and he decides, I'm going to paint my house. So he gets started on painting his house. Meanwhile, he keeps on drinking. He notices that there's some birds, and those birds are going to do what birds are apt to do, which is ruin his brand new paint job, probably half completed. And so he does the only reasonable, logical thing that you can do when you're a couple beers in and there's birds possibly pooping on your house. Let's get the shotgun and shoot them. And again, it's Vermont in the 1930s. That was still not cool. You could not do that. So he was looking at 6 months in jail. And oh, awesome. Welcome. Glad you're here. So he's looking at 6 months in jail. And again, if I'm struggling with belief in a power greater than myself, I don't know about you, but I can see it all over the history. Because Ebby Thatcher's standing on trial for the exact week that Roland Hazard happens to be in town. A week earlier, a week later, we might not be here. But Roland Hazard's visiting. And he hears about his friend that's standing trial for his alcoholic-related offenses. And what happens is, he shows up to court, and the court was actually, the judge of the court was actually a friend of his father. And, it was him, Shep Cornell, Seba Graves. You can see on page 9, the short little paragraph. And, you look at, I'd imagine there's probably like Real Housewives of, Manchester, Vermont, or Real Housewives of Vermont. Like there was probably those rich guys up in Vermont. Everybody knew each other's gossip. Everybody knew each other's business. Everybody knew that Roland Hazard kept drinking. But you see, the judge said, only for you, Roland, I'm going to let him go into your care. He's got to be sober on Monday, but only for you. And I wonder if he had said that because not only had he heard of Roland's drinking exploits, but had heard of the change that had happened to him. And so Ebby Thatcher, maybe not with the best motives, doesn't want to go to jail. He works the steps. He has a spiritual experience. And so he's got the two pieces of information, the solution and our program of action. And then it comes in our intrepid hero, Bill Wilson. Ebby Thatcher carries that message to Bill. Now, Bill had been hospitalized 2 previous times in the town's hospital where he had met Dr. Silkworth. In his first hospitalization, he had learned about the physical allergy. He had learned about the mental obsession, and he had self-knowledge, and there was no way he was going to drink again. And he drinks again. And a year later, he goes back to the hospital, and he overhears Dr. Silkworth telling his wife, Bill's going to die. He's going to die of this thing. You've got to put him away in an asylum or get some of his affairs in order. He's not going to make it. And Bill, in that moment, knows the grave nature of alcoholism. He understands his physical allergy. He understands his mental obsession. And he understands that he is going to die of this thing. And when his friend, Ebby Thatcher, shows up to Bill's kitchen table, Bill's drinking gin, he's got those 3 pieces of information that we need to know in order to achieve sobriety in 12 steps. He understands his problem. He understands the solution. And he understands the program of action. And then he goes back to the town's hospital and he works the steps and he has the spiritual awakening. And from that spiritual awakening, I can't stay well on an old experience. He goes and carries that message to others. So let's pop back in the book. All right. And so it says, prior to his journey to Akron. So before, he had gone to Akron, Ohio to get this rubber companies all connected and to make all this money. Welcome, Terry, glad you're here. Before he had done that, he had been working hard. The broker, Bill Wilson, had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help another alcoholic, but had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. Now, there is this story, and I've been told it's not true, but we can't let the truth get in the way of a good story, so we're going to tell it anyways. So Bill Wilson, so there's aspects of truth in it, but how I'm going to tell it might not be the most truthful. But Bill Wilson, so he has this powerful spiritual experience, and he knows about the solution, he knows about the problem, and he knows about the program of action. And he's going out almost immediately after he gets out of the hospital. He's not even out of the hospital. He wants to go help others. He wants to go and carry this message. And he works with others, and he works with others, and he works with others. And man, nobody is getting sober. Nobody is. He's hustling this. He's carrying the message left. He's carrying the message right. Nobody's picking up what he's throwing down. Nobody's here for it. And Bill Wilson, he's feeling discouraged. And, at this point in his life, his wife, Lois, is still supporting the family financially. She's still working for him. He couldn't find steady work. He was trying with that too, but he was really focusing on working with others. And he goes to Lois and he says, Lois, I think I'm going to ease off on this working with others stuff. I think I'm going to really focus on getting some solid employment. Because nobody's staying sober. And in that moment, Lois probably didn't, but who cares, definitely said, but Bill, you've stayed sober. You've stayed sober. And then he goes back to Dr. Silkworth and he's like, Silky, because they're friends now. Silky, what happened? Why is nobody staying sober? And Silky's like, all right, tell me how you're working with these guys. And Bill's like, listen, what I do is I talk about my white light spiritual experience. I talk about the flash, talk about the mountaintop. I talk about how God came to me. And Silkworth's like, dude, Bill, no. Tone it down. Don't be doing that. Don't lead in with that. Lead in with what I told you. Explain the problem. Explain the hopelessness of alcoholism. And the first guy that he did that with was Dr. Bob. And so Bill Wilson, he goes to Akron, Ohio, and he had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed. See, again, his spiritual awakening, not his, white light spiritual awakening, but the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous started with what? An alcoholic not getting what he wanted. He went to Akron, Ohio, because he was going to combine these companies and he was going to be set on his feet financially, and it got bogged down in a lawsuit. And doesn't God always show up when I get not what I want, but so often what I need? And so, and that left him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. And that's when he's in the Mayflower Hotel. And to the right of him, and it's not quite like this, but this is how I'm telling this story. To the right of him is the bar. And he could hear the laughter and the crowd inside, and you can almost hear the clink of the ice on the glass, like clink, clink, clink. And oh, it's so wonderful. And to the left of him is the telephone booth with the church directory. And he's having that wrestling inside himself, and he thinks, what, I've been sober 6 months. 6 months. I could go in there and maybe handle maybe 3 drinks, no more. Maybe it was 6 drinks, no more. And he could see he was on thin ice. It was the mental obsession, and he could see it. And in that moment, he was restored to sanity. He goes to the phone booth and picks up the phone and tries to help another alcoholic. Now, what allowed him to be restored to sanity? It was the work he had been doing for 6 months. It was the hustling his butt, trying to help other alcoholics. that allowed the power of God to work in his life and to direct him to that phone booth. And again, a series of calls. He calls Reverend Walter Tunks, who calls Norman Shepherd, who calls my girl Henrietta Seiberling. I love her. Who calls Ann Smith. And if any of those calls are missed, if none of those connections are made, again, we might not be here. There's no answering machines. There's no call forwarding. There's no call waiting. Heck, most people at that time, yeah, my girl, Henrietta Seiberling. Most people at that time didn't even have their own phone line. They were rocking a party line, you know? So if any of those calls are missed, we might not be here. Now, in that hotel room or in that hotel lobby, he says he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. He must. See, working with others is not top tier, extra special sobriety. It's a minimum requirement for somebody like me. And again, I say that a lot, but I want you to know if you're here at the study today and you're like, man, I haven't sponsored, or I don't know if I could sponsor. Our job is to help you. My job is to help you. So let us help you help others. And man, it's in working with others, this thing takes off. We'd be missing out on some of the most amazing gifts of this program if I didn't do it. And you know, it's interesting. It says the physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma. Dr. Bob. So he gets a hold of Dr. Bob. He goes and meets Dr. Bob. And the connection was Dr. Bob was already in the Oxford group. He was already there. It's kind of like being next to a lake and dying of thirst, but he didn't know what was wrong with him. He didn't know what he had to do. And it says, but when the broker, Bill Wilson, gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, there's that word. The physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady. Malady just means sickness. With a willingness, absolutely, with a willingness that he had never before been able to muster. Man, it's only when I understand the hopelessness of my dilemma that I'm willing to accept the hope that's on offer. Let's be real, the steps are not very appealing when I feel like I got other options. And if I did, heck, if I got other options, I can go do those. But it's only when I see the hopelessness, the reality of my alcoholic dilemma, or whatever brings you to this study, my dilemma, that I'm willing to take actions that I don't want to take, to do things I don't want to do, to dive into this way of life. And that's when I experienced the freedom, hopeless to hope. And you know what Dr. Bob didn't want to do? Amends. It was amends. That's what he was sitting on, is amends. That's what I got to do. And so it says he sobered, never to drink again, up to the moment of his death in 1950. So again, that type of sobriety is possible. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. And what I want to say about that sentence today is, man, that's my duty, because I get to help somebody who has suffered in the way that I've suffered that nobody else can. Like, I was helped by people who have my illness, and I owe it to those who passed it on to me to pass it on to others. And it also indicated, now this, highlight, underline, stars beside, if you want to draw unicorns in your book, here's where. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. If I want permanent recovery, I've got to work with others. I've got some bad news. It's gotta be strenuous. For those that know me, you know that I say, if it's not inconvenient, if it's not at least a little inconvenient, I don't have enough sponsees. You know what I mean? I got to be a little bit inconvenient. You're allowed to have hobbies. You're allowed to have hobbies. But man, if it's not a little inconvenient, I got to go get some more sponsees to work with. So if I want permanent recovery, I've got to work with others. Yeah, permanent recovery. Yeah. Now, again, that does not mean cured. What we're talking about is permanent recovery. Pew, pew, rockets. Yeah. That does not mean cured. That does not mean solved. Now, if you're coming back from last week, you know I can't have crockpot sobriety. I can't set it and forget it. I can't stay well on one drink. I can't stay well on one crack hoot. Bless you if you could. I can't stay well on one experience. I got to continue to grow it and build it. But as a result of me continuing to seek and to grow permanent recovery, that's available. Heck yeah. Yeah, vital, life supporting, life sustaining. I was not life supporting and life sustaining on my own power. I'm a rocket the other way, going right to the ground. Actually, I have a thing. I'm a relief seeking missile, and we're aimed towards destruction. That's who I am on my own power. And so it says, hence the two men set to work almost frantically. Again, strenuous, frantic. I'm meant to really hustle in working with others. Upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one. Desperate sounds a lot like hopeless, does it not? If I know I'm hopeless, I'm pretty desperate. And that desperate one, if you want to see his handsome face, it's right behind Rob. That's Bill Dotson, AA number 3. And so he never had another drink. Hey, that sounds a little like permanent recovery too, doesn't it? He never had another drink. The very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. Sometimes I get a little excited and forget to finish sentences. That happens to me. So it says, this work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. And sometimes it feels like that when I first start sponsoring, where I'm starting to get the groove with it, or I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to help. Man, it feels like there's many failures, but then there's that occasional heartening success. And it's the most incredible, wonderful thing to be a small part of the miracle of someone else, to see the light come on in their eyes. Yeah, that's right, Henrietta. Listen, I just want to point out, like, this is why last week we talked about how the stories in the back of the book had to be changed. Everyone was Bill, maybe a William. All their wives were Henrietta or Lois. You know what I mean? Like, it's all had the same name. So we had to change the story so it wouldn't get confused. I'm just making a joke. But that idea that truly, man, I've got to help others. And so, and when I help others, that's when there's real freedom. And I get to be a small part of this thing. You know, I get to be a small part of Bill Wilson carrying the message to Dr. Bob, a small part of the link of them carrying the message to Bill Dotson. I get to be a small link in that chain. And through me, the God of my understanding gets to work miracles, not me working miracles, but through me and these actions, these 12 steps to have a spiritual way of life. Man, to be a part of what happens here, it's incredible. And I would encourage everyone here, dive in. You don't want to miss it. It's incredible. So, and then it says, when the broker, that's Bill Wilson, he was hanging out at Akron for a while, returned to New York in the fall of 1935. The first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time. And so what happened is, in the early days, you know, they were just members of the Oxford group. And what they were known as the Drug Squad, Drug Squad, which is like a really cool name, I think. Drug Squad, Alcoholic Squad of the Oxford group. And so there's a bunch of, like, you know, upper class, fancy people. And then, you know, they'd head over. If you want to see what the early meeting room looked like, you can look behind Rob. It was T. Henry and Clarence Williams' place. And so it's this lovely house and with these lovely, wonderful people. And Bill and Bob would bring in the drunks. Yeah, and we'd just be classing up the joint. They'd have their tea doilies and their, you know, fancy stuff and us. Woo! But they were a member of the Oxford group, and then I took them a little while and they broke off. And it says, a second small group took shape at New York to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. And that third group in Cleveland, that was the very first, like, really, they didn't break off. They just were Alcoholics Anonymous. It was started by a gentleman by the name of Clarence Snyder, who we talk about him. He was a difficult personality. And through that difficult personality, AA grew and flourished in Cleveland. It's a reminder, if we got difficult personalities in our home group, oh, I love that. If we got difficult personalities in our home group, God's still using them. And maybe using them to get me to write my inventory. And if you're interested, Rob put in the chat the information for the Zoom link for the very first, I'll just read it. So when Dr. Bob left the Oxford group, they went to King's School. So the meeting still goes on today. And if you're ever interested, you can, it's Wednesdays at 8 p.m. and the ID and passwords in the chat. So it's a fun way to zoom into a bit of history. I've not gone, but it's an experience. So it says, besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron or New York, who were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light, that would be a great name for a big book study. That's the name of the big book study, because it's like when you go to a movie and it's like the title of the movie, they say it in the movie. I don't watch a lot of movies, but I imagine you go Top Gun and they're like, yeah, we're going to be Top Gun. It's like that. A new light, big book study. A new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. And what we're talking about there is alcoholics did not get sober. Alcoholics did not stay sober. Alcoholics died of alcoholism or ended up in asylums. That was, we're on page XVII. So forward to the second edition, XVII, and we're on the second paragraph near the end of the second paragraph. And so right at the end of the second paragraph, a new light entered the dark world of the alcoholic. That's what we're talking about. And what I'm saying is alcoholics, we didn't get well. We died of this illness. That's the dark world of the alcoholic. If I have alcoholism, it is terminal. But there were these few alcoholics who are taking some actions, who are having a spiritual awakening, who are staying sober. And that was the new light in the dark world of the alcoholic. There's a new hope. That's a Star Wars movie. Title of the movie and the ad focus. So it says, it was now time. The struggling groups sought to place their message and unique experience before the world. Now keep in mind, we've got members that are sober at most like 2-3 years. I would not feel like there's a couple things with that. 1, 2-3 years sober. It's easy to forget the miracles that happen around us. 2 to 3 years sober, that's nothing less than a miracle. That did not happen before 1935. Except if in a very few, rare 1 in a million cases, alcoholics did not stay sober 2 to 3 years, but they were seeing that something was working. People were getting sober and staying sober. And it says this, so they had this idea to share their unique experience before the world, to share this message. And it says this determination bore fruit, this idea of carrying the message to more people in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. What they're saying is they wrote the book. That's what it's saying. And at that time, they had some ideas. They had 3 ideas. So the first idea was that they were going to build an AA hospital. And they kind of sussed it out and found like some land or a building in Akron, Ohio. And thank goodness we didn't get the money for that. And then they had a second idea. And that second idea was they were going to have professional paid 12-steppers. They're, Dr. Bob, he's real successful at it. Let's give him the money. Let's have him full-time 12-steppers. Couldn't get the money for that. Rich people knew better than we do not to give us money. I don't know why rich people would think to give alcoholics money. it's weird. We're so reliable and so good at paying back. And I'm sure none of us have outstanding financial events, you know? And then their third idea was to write a book. And they were able to scrape and scrounge enough money to write this book. And they wrote it with the hopes they could fund the other stuff. They couldn't. And thank goodness, right? Us not getting what we want. And as a result, getting what we needed. So the publication of this volume, and again, what is the point of this book? Well, it's to prevent that message from getting lost, to carry that precise message. If you've ever, you know, in kindergarten or elementary school, anyone ever played the telephone game? It's where you get in a circle and you whisper like, I like pizza, and then it goes around and it's like purple hippo, and it's like, ha 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 ha, you know that. The book is to prevent that. It's to carry this precise message, these precise directions. And again, that's why we're going through the book line by line and going through in this way. And it says the membership had then reached about 100 men and women. It was about 80. They rounded up, and it was like 80 dudes and one gal. And the one gal at that time, her name was Florence Rankin. And thank goodness for her. She didn't end up staying sober, but she was like, listen, you cannot call this book 100 Men. I will not stand for it. Absolutely not. So we can thank her, because instead the book was called Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is an important line. Oh, thank you so much for coming. No worries. So glad to see you. This line is important. It says the fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. Alcoholics Anonymous is named after the book, not the other way around. That tells us how important this book is. Probably good to have at meetings too, and, you know, reading stuff. But we're named after the book. AA is named after the book. And then it says the flying blind period, and Rob put in the chat, that's 1935 to 1935. So that flying blind period is from the period of Dr. Bob's sobriety date to April 1939, when they published the book. And AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. And what we're going to see, this new phase of its pioneering time, is how AA started to grow and get publicity, and some of the challenges that come when you get a lot of alcoholics meeting together, and how do we navigate that? So it says, with the appearance of the new book, so they published the book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, I got to pronounce his name very carefully, and if you look behind Rob, you can see that. And yeah, he was like a prominent, as it says, a prominent Baptist minister. So he was this like well-known guy, and who was held in positive standing. And he's saying, this is a good book. This is a moral book. So the noted clergyman, he reviewed it with approval. So we got positive review from Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick. It's just such a good name. And then it says, in the fall of 1939, Fulton, and also if you want to read more of Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, who wouldn't? There's some fun facts about him in the chat. Yeah. So in the fall of 1939, Fulton Oursler, then editor of Liberty. Liberty was just a magazine. Think kind of like a Reader's Digest, or and if you're too young for Reader's Digest, I'm struggling with comparisons. Just a magazine that would go out that was, you know, kind of easy reading. Fulton Oursler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. And so they got more publicity. It says this brought in a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Keep in mind, there's about 80 of them. So imagine you got 800. So you got like 10 people that you got to deal with, like 10, 12-step calls, almost like reaching out for you immediately. It's a little overwhelming, right? And not everyone was helping at the office. But it says each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and books were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found to the astonishment of everyone that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. And it's one of those things, if in 1939 AA's message could be transmitted in the mail, why wouldn't something like Zoom work, you know? Why wouldn't we be able to recover and stay well online? And it says by the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery. 800. So imagine, let's say your home group, you got maybe like 20 members, maybe 20 home group members in the spring. And by the end of the spring, you got 200. That would be a little overwhelming. Whoa, what do we do? So it says in the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends, to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires, and inquiries poured in again. Many people went to the bookstores to get the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, that's the title of the book, AA, named after the book, not the other way around. To get the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. By March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Again, think like 2 springs down the line, and 2 years later, to now we're going into thousands. 20 to 200 to 2,000, like, whoa. Yeah. Oh, who has the longest sobriety in AA history? That's probably a Rob question. There was a gal who passed away recently, and I think she had in the 60 something years. I'll look it up and I'll do my best to get an answer for you. And I'm here for those. I'm here for those questions. Also, I think it's very helpful to know that I was able to say, I don't know, rather than just make something up. Listen, let me tell you about this person. All right. So by March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Then, Jack Alexander. I should have grabbed this ahead of time. That hurt my back. Jack Alexander wrote a feature article in the Saturday Evening Post. Yes, Liz Bailey, that's who I was thinking of. 69 years. She passed away just in the last few years. I've heard remarkable things about her, like an incredible, remarkable woman. Thank you, Terry. So Jack Alexander, and he wrote, so if you're interested, Jack Alexander article. He wrote this article in the Saturday Evening Post. And Saturday Evening Post was it was this magazine, like Liberty. If you ever know any Norman Rockwell paintings, it's an obscure reference, but there's somebody we got 75 years. Ooh, that's okay. Sorry, focus. I'm trying to get this paragraph done in the next 3 minutes. Will I manage? Let's find out. Oh, the odds are not in my favor on that. Okay. So Saturday Evening Post, it was a magazine just like Liberty. And if you know any if you're kind of an art nerd and you know Norman Rockwell were some of those American, classic paintings. He did paintings for the Saturday Evening Post, and you'd see those. But Jack Alexander, who he was, his whole career was built on busting scams. That was his whole deal. He was, all about, like, I think the article he did before this one was like finding this whole scam that was going on with the Philadelphia Labor Union, like a 2020 Dateline NBC, 60 Minutes, all of that. And so he was tasked with investigating Alcoholics Anonymous. So there's these drunks, they got to be scamming people. Like, it's got to be that way. And so he goes and investigates. And you know what he finds? He finds that it's the real deal. It's one alcoholic helping another for fun and for free. And somebody who made his career off saying, that's a scam, that's a scam, that's a scam, saying, actually not a scam. That led to a lot of credibility. And that placed such a compelling picture of AA. People were like, wow, this is legitimate. That alcoholics in need of help really deluged us. That means to be overwhelmed by. By the way, I've had this pamphlet for years, and to be honest with you, I hadn't read it for up until recently, and I only read it recently because I was asked to do a share on a pamphlet that, share on something that you haven't read. So read it and then do a share on it. No worries. Um, and man, if you have not read this article, if you turn to page 26 in the article, it is the wildest story about somebody trying to stay sober. Oftentimes I'll say, I haven't tried everything. I definitely haven't tried everything, but everything that I tried failed. So that's just my little hook. If you're interested in reading this pamphlet, it's a little cliffhanger I'll leave you on, and don't worry. I know we might go a minute over, but I'll wrap up here in a sec. So he placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that Alcoholics in Need of Help really deluged us. And that is the overwhelming, that, oh gosh, I'm overwhelmed with that need of help. And then it says, by the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. So to go in the spring of 1939, from 80 to 8,000. 8,000. It blossomed in only a few years. And the mushrooming process was in full swing. AA had become a national institution. And we'll leave it there. All right. Thanks for, hold on. I got to do the stop recording. And thanks for coming. I'm so glad everyone's here. And hang around for a sec. I'll wrap up and we can all unmute and say the Serenity Prayer.